how do we want to prepare our city to be resilient to the impacts of climate change, right? What do we need to do? How are we going to pay for it? Who is going to be part of this? And what is it going to cost? Who's going to pay? Who's going to bear the burden of these things? And how are we going to make sure that the most vulnerable people get help, because they're usually the last people to be thought of in these kinds of exercises, right? And so those kinds of tools, not only do they exist, we have books written about them. We have coursework ready to go, and we have a whole network of experts that are ready to help, that we can kind of call on when people need some help to do this kind of scenario planning, right? One of the cases that we use scenario planning for all the time is in the West, where we do a thing called growing water smart. And growing water smart is really about how we kind of link together two things that very often, at the local government level, work in isolation. One is planning and how to manage water demand, especially in the West where water is scarce, right? With development planning, right? So spatial planners, the people who are doing the city planners, in the past in the West, as odd as it seems, when people decided they're going to do kind of, the suburban subdivision, they decided the planners would go and they'd approve a suburban subdivision, and they just assumed that the water utility was going to find the water for them, right? But actually, when we brought people together to actually talk about what does it actually take to responsibly grow in the arid West, they realized they needed to find ways to link water management with land use policy, right? And we bring water managers and land use planners together, and we bring them through scenario exercises to say, what will happen if we run out of water? What will happen where are we going to find the water if we allow this subdivision to go forward? And then they actually have to talk about it, and then they make informed decisions based on these scenarios that play out. Like, what will happen if we have another 20-year drought in the Colorado Basin? And if we have another 20-year drought in the Colorado Basin, who is going to go without and who is going to be actually served? How are we going to manage this really precious resource called the Colorado River, which provides water right now for 45 million people living in the U.S. West, right? And until we have those discussions, we actually run the risk of creating our own crisis, right? Where we just overuse the water, which we've done, right? And now our big reservoirs behind, Lake Powell and Lake Mead they have been at record low levels until we had the recent rains that have now brought them up a millimeter, not the 135 feet that they're down. They brought them up maybe 2 or 3 feet. And now we need to still figure out what we can do to responsibly manage those resources, right? But in any case, I mean, the point being that that's one tool that we have, right? But we also have, and that tool, by the way, scenario planning tool, is supported by really, really technical tools that we have in a thing called the Center for Geospatial Solutions that can deploy remote sensing, really high detailed mapping, spatial analysis of what's going on at the parcel level in properties in the United States. And we can track changes in land use and ownership patterns in the United States, at least since at the parcel level since 2015. And right now it looks like we might be able to go back to 2000 and track all sorts of changes in land use patterns and ownership patterns in the United States. Well, the project that we kind of propped up on that is called Who Owns America? And in Who Owns America, we have a platform now that has every parcel of land in the United States, almost 200 million parcels of land in the United States, in a database with unbelievable amounts of information about every one of those parcels, like who owns it, what are its dimensions, what size building is on that parcel, who are the last 5 owners, what did it sell for, what's its assessed value, all this stuff, right? And now we can look at new emerging patterns that people didn't even see coming, or they heard about anecdotally, but now we can record them and put metrics to them, right? One of the things that most mayors want to know is, why is it that outside investors are buying up our single family housing stock? And what does that mean for our cities? So as it turns out, about 20% of transactions in any given year are investors buying single family homes and converting them from owner occupancy to rental, right? So, and what's really odd about it is which homes are they buying, right? They're not buying the $100 million apartments they're building in New York City. They're buying all the single family starter homes in low income, moderate income, and minority neighborhoods because the rents are high and the cost of buying the homes are low relative to the rents. And so they can make a lot more money renting them out. But, now we think about what are the implications of that? Well, let's say we care about things like, the racial wealth gap. And the racial wealth gap in the United States was built on basically structural racism that was embedded in our housing finance system for the last, I don't know, 70, 80, 90 years, right? Ever since the Great Depression. And we essentially, for 90 years, we locked minority communities and ethnic communities out of access to housing finance and capital, and we allowed those communities to deteriorate for generations, to the point where the home ownership rate today in the United States for African Americans is lower than it was in 1960. What does that mean? Well, in 1960, we didn't have like the Fair Housing Act. We didn't have the Civil Rights Act. We didn't have the Community Reinvestment Act. We have all these efforts we've now made to kind of correct that problem. So we've lost ground since 1960 in terms of the home ownership rate. And if you look at the wealth of American families, 70 to 80% of the wealth of American families is held in real estate. And the net worth of homeowners is about 80 times the net worth of renters in the United States. What does that mean? It means that almost all the wealth of American families is held in their homes, right? So if you want to figure out what is the source of the racial wealth gap, which is profoundly huge, right? The source of it is the racial homeownership gap. And right now, the homeownership rate for whites is about 80%, and the home ownership rates for blacks is less than 50%. The homeownership rate for Hispanics is about 49, 50% as well. And that accounts for, I would say, anywhere from 80 to 90% of the wealth differences between those groups, right? So if we sell all the starter homes in our cities and we rent them out to low income and moderate income people, when are they going to buy? What are they going to buy? There's not going to be anything available to buy because we're not building new homes that are available to buy. And this is the existing housing stock that these are the starter homes they could have bought in the past, right? So now we got to worry about that. And now we have to figure out ways to help places do something to defend their housing stock. And so, one of the things we've done as part of this Who Owns America effort, we've mapped out for individual communities, sometimes counties, sometimes cities, sometimes states, who owns their housing stock, how it's been changing over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and what can be done about it. And then we give them, we have a little toolkit now of about 10 or 12 different methods that local governments or state governments or even the national government can use to prevent our national housing stock from moving from the hands of individual homeowners to the hands of investors, right? And, if we don't do something pretty quick, we're going to lose control of our housing stock, and we're going to change the kind of the entire cultural configuration of our country, which was built on home ownership as a signifier of family success, and we're going to replace it with something else, right? There's lots of places in the world where the predominant housing choice is rental, right? And those societies survive in different ways. But in the United States, our entire cultural construct around self-efficacy is really built on people having their home as their castle and their ability to kind of build wealth and transfer wealth across generations with their homes. And if we let that slip through our fingers, then bad for us, bad on us, right? And we should be better than that. So, and I think when I talk to mayors, every mayor in the country is looking at this. And now we talk to county executives, and the county executives are all over this, right? State governments are starting to take it seriously. And so little by little, I think we're going to be able to do something about it, but we better do something quick before we lose control of that housing stock, right?